When my daughter Emily died in my arms at 38, I never imagined the real pain would begin at her own funeral. That's when the man who abandoned her 10 years ago showed up, dressed in black, demanding the $29 million she left me. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell because we have new stories every day. Leave a like, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is David Miller. I'm 68 years old, and for the last 4 months, I lived through the greatest hell of my life, watching cancer slowly take my only daughter, Emily. She was my everything since her mother passed away when she was just 12. I raised her alone, worked day and night to give her the best education, and I was filled with pride when she became a successful entrepreneur with her own chain of fashion stores in Chicago and New York. On March 15, 2024, Emily called me into her hospital room. Her eyes, which once shone with determination, now reflected the serenity of someone who knows the end is near. "Dad," she said, her voice weak but firm, "I need you to know something very important. I've been getting everything ready for you." She handed me a sealed envelope with documents that would change my life forever. When I opened that envelope at home that night, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Emily had amassed a fortune of $29 million through her businesses and investments. In her will, drafted with Michael Clark, our trusted family lawyer, she named me as her sole universal heir. "Dad, you were a father and a mother to me. No one else deserves what I built with so much effort." She had written this in a personal letter that came with the documents. Emily passed away on March 22, 2024, at 6:47 inches the morning. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. In that moment, I felt a part of my soul leave with her. The next few days were a blur of pain, paperwork, and funeral preparations. On March 25th, the day of the funeral, the St. Francis Grand Church was filled with family, friends, and Emily's business partners. I was in the front row, devastated by grief, when someone touched my shoulder. When I turned, I saw a tall man, about 42 years old, dressed in an elegant black suit and tie, with tears streaming down his cheeks. "David," he said with a broken voice, "I'm Daniel Peterson. I'm so sorry for the loss of our dear Emily." For a moment, I didn't react. Our dear Emily. This man had the nerve to show up after 10 years of total abandonment and speak as if he had been a part of my daughter's life. Daniel had been Emily's husband for just 2 years, from 2012 to 2014. When she told him she was pregnant in January 2014, he disappeared overnight, leaving her alone with their marriage debts and a pregnancy that sadly ended in a miscarriage due to the stress. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" I asked in a low voice, trying to keep my composure in that sacred place. "I came to say goodbye to the woman I loved," he answered, drying his tears with a white handkerchief. "Emily and I had our problems, but she was always special to me." What angered me the most was watching how he acted in front of the other attendees. He positioned himself in the second row, just behind me, sobbing theatrically. Several people who didn't know the story approached him to offer comfort, thinking he was the grieving widower. He even went up to the casket during the final farewell, placed his hand on the wooden surface, and murmured something I couldn't hear. After the church service, we headed to Oak Ridge Cemetery. The entire way, Daniel stayed close to the family, as if he had every right to be there. His behavior seemed increasingly strange and calculated. It wasn't the genuine grief of someone who had lost a loved one, but something more artificial. As they lowered the casket, Daniel approached me again. "David, we need to talk after this. There are important things we need to discuss about Emily and, well, about the future." Those words sent a chill down my spine. The future? What future was a man talking about who had abandoned my daughter at the hardest moment of her life? In that instant, I knew Daniel hadn't come to the funeral just to say goodbye. He had other plans, and something told me they were not going to be good for Emily's memory, or for the peace I so desperately needed in that moment of pain. After the burial, while the other guests headed to the reception at my sister Linda's house, Daniel waited for me by his black Mercedes. His attitude had completely changed. He was no longer faking the theatrical grief from the funeral. Now he wore a calculating smile that set my nerves on edge. "David, I think it's time we spoke frankly," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Emily was legally my wife, and under state law, I have rights to her estate." I was frozen. Rights? This miserable excuse for a man thought he could show up after a decade of total silence and claim what Emily had built with her own sweat and sacrifice. "Daniel, you and my daughter divorced in August 2014. You have no right to anything," I replied, staying calm even though I was boiling with rage inside. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," he said with that arrogant smile. "I've been doing some research, and it turns out Emily never correctly finalized all the divorce paperwork. Technically, we were still married in certain legal aspects. My lawyers have confirmed that I can claim at least half of those $29 million she accumulated." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This scoundrel had been planning this for a while. He knew about Emily's fortune, and had come like a vulture to claim his share of the loot. "How dare you?" I yelled, losing my composure for the first time. "You abandoned my daughter when she needed you most. You left her alone, pregnant and drowning in debt. You disappeared like a coward, and now, after 10 years, you come here talking about rights?" Daniel threw his cigarette on the ground and looked at me coldly. "Look, David, I understand you're hurting, but feelings don't change the law. Emily built that business empire, yes, but when we were a couple, I also contributed to the start of her business. I have documents to prove it. It was a lie, and I knew it. Emily had started her first store in 2016, 2 years after the divorce, with a loan that I myself helped her secure. Daniel never invested a single dollar in my daughter's dreams. Listen to me carefully," he continued in a threatening voice. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you give me my share voluntarily, let's say $15 million, we can avoid a long and costly legal process that will tarnish Emily's memory in every newspaper in the country." There it was, the true face of Daniel Peterson. He wasn't just an opportunist, but also a blackmailer willing to use my deceased daughter's good name to get money. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "No, I'm offering you a civilized solution. But if you'd rather the media finds out that the father of the successful entrepreneur Emily Miller is denying her widower his rightful inheritance," he let the sentence hang in the air. At that moment, I vividly remembered the day Daniel left Emily. It was January 28th, 2014. Emily called me at 11 at night, crying, telling me she had come home to find a note on the kitchen table. "I'm gone. This isn't working. Don't try to contact me," that was it. He didn't even have the courage to say goodbye in person or explain why he was running away when she needed support the most. In the following weeks, Emily discovered that Daniel had emptied their joint bank account, taking $12,000 that were her savings to invest in her future business. He also left unpaid bills for the apartment they shared, forcing Emily to take on debts she hadn't created. The most painful part was when Emily lost the baby in March 2014. She tried to contact Daniel to tell him about the tragedy, but he had changed his phone number and blocked her on all social media. My daughter had to go through the grief of losing her child and her marriage at the same time, all alone. "You know what, Daniel?" I said with a calmness I didn't know I had. "You're right about one thing. This can be done the easy way or the hard way, but I assure you, if you try to tarnish my daughter's name with your lies, I will show you exactly what I'm capable of." Daniel let out a sarcastic laugh. "Are you trying to scare me, old man? I'm 42 and you're 68. Besides, I have resources and connections you can't even imagine. My offer is on the table. 15 million now, or 20 million after the trial, plus all the legal fees it will cost me to destroy your reputation. Get out of here before I do something I'll regret," I warned him. "You have 1 week to think about it," he said, getting into his Mercedes. "Next Monday you'll receive the legal documents. I hope you reconsider your position, because this is just getting started." As I watched his car drive away, I felt a mix of rage and determination I hadn't felt in years. This man thought he could take advantage of the pain of a father who had just lost his daughter, but he had picked the wrong person. Emily had taught me to fight for what is right, and that was exactly what I was going to do. That night, in the solitude of my home, surrounded by photos of Emily from her childhood to her final days. I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give Daniel a single cent, and I would do everything in my power to expose his true intentions before the law. The day after my encounter with Daniel, I decided to start my own investigation. I couldn't just sit around waiting for his legal threats. If this man had planned everything so precisely, I needed to find out what else he was hiding. My first stop was the office of Michael Clark, the lawyer who had drafted Emily's will. Michael, a 55-year-old man with over 20 years of experience in inheritance law, saw me that morning in his office on Michigan Avenue. "David, I am so sorry for your loss," he said as he reviewed the documents Emily had signed. "I want you to know that your daughter's will is absolutely ironclad. She was very specific in her instructions and was in full command of her mental faculties when we drafted it. Michael, I need you to investigate Daniel Peterson. He says he has rights to Emily's inheritance, but I know he's lying." Michael took notes as I recounted the conversation from the cemetery. "Let me check the divorce files. If I remember correctly, Emily was very clear about ensuring all legal ties were completely severed. While Michael looked into the legal aspects, I decided to contact Patricia Johnson, who had been Emily's personal assistant for the last 5 years. Patricia knew my daughter's movements and contacts better than anyone. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near Emily's offices in the financial district. Patricia, a woman of 34, had always been loyal and discreet, but that day I saw she was nervous and restless. "Mr. Miller, there's something I need to tell you about Daniel," she said, constantly looking around as if she were afraid of being overheard. "For the last 3 months, that man has been trying to get close to Emily." "What do you mean, get close?" I asked, feeling my pulse quicken. "Last December, he started calling the office asking for Emily. At first, he used fake names, but I recognized his voice because Emily had told me about him years ago. When I told Miss Emily, she asked me to hang up on him immediately, if he ever called again." Patricia continued to reveal details that made my blood run cold. In January, Daniel showed up at the offices in person. Emily wasn't there because she had started her chemotherapy, but he insisted on talking to me. He asked me about the company's financial situation, how many stores we had, if Emily had any partners or investors. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing, of course. But he kept pushing. He offered me $500 just to confirm if Emily was as successful as the newspapers said. I obviously threw him out of the office, but later I found out he had been asking the same questions at the bank where Emily had her main accounts. This confirmed my suspicions. Daniel hadn't shown up at the funeral by chance, or out of any genuine love for Emily. He had been preparing this scheme for months, researching my daughter's financial situation while she was battling cancer. "Patricia, do you have any proof of these approaches?" "Yes, Mr. Miller. Emily asked me to record all office calls after Daniel's first contact. I have the recordings saved on my personal computer." Those words were music to my ears. If Daniel had admitted his true intentions during those calls, we would have solid evidence of his opportunistic behavior. The next day, Patricia brought me the recordings on a USB drive. Listening to them at home, I felt a mix of astonishment and disgust. In one of the recordings from February 15th, Daniel clearly said, "Look, Patricia, I know Emily is sick. I just want to know if it's worth trying for a reconciliation. You understand what I mean? I'm not going to waste my time if she has nothing to offer me." In another recording from March 8th, Daniel was even more explicit. "I've heard that Emily has several million stashed away. If that's true, I think we could resolve our past issues. Everyone deserves a second chance, especially when there's so much money on the line." But the most revealing recording was from March 20th, just 2 days before Emily's death. Daniel had called asking directly about the will. "Do you know if Emily has made a will? Because technically, if we're still married under some legal provision, I would have automatic rights to her estate." Now I understood Daniel's plan completely. He had been monitoring Emily's illness, waiting for the moment of her death to appear as the grieving husband and claim the inheritance. It was a plan as cruel as it was calculated. That same evening, I received another crucial piece of information through Andrew Moore an old colleague with contacts in the financial sector. Andrew confirmed that Daniel was indeed in serious financial trouble. David, I've asked around discreetly about Daniel Peterson. The man is completely broke. He lost his consulting firm in 2022 due to bad crypto investments. He also has gambling debts at several Chicago casinos totaling over $80,000. The loan sharks are pressuring him, and according to my contacts, he's desperate to get money fast. Everything fit perfectly. Daniel wasn't just an opportunist, but a desperate man who saw Emily's death as his only financial salvation. He had bet his future on getting that inheritance, and that's why he was so confident in his legal threats. With all this information, I called Michael to schedule an urgent meeting. We had solid evidence of Daniel's fraudulent character, but we needed to prepare a solid legal strategy before he followed through on his threat to start the legal process. On Friday night, as I was organizing all the documents and recordings, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but when I answered, I immediately recognized Daniel's voice. David, I hope you've reconsidered my offer. On Monday, I'm filing the papers at the courthouse, and I assure you it will be much more expensive for you. Last chance. $15 million and we're all happy. Daniel, I replied firmly, I think you're the one who should reconsider your position. I've discovered some very interesting things about your true intentions. There was a long silence before he answered. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm warning you, don't play games with me. I have resources and contacts that can make your life very complicated. We'll see who has the better hand in this game, I said before hanging up. That night, for the first time since Emily's death, I slept peacefully. I knew the legal battle ahead would be intense, but now I had the weapons necessary to defend my daughter's legacy and unmask the true intentions of this opportunist. On Monday, April 1st, 2024, just as he had promised, Daniel followed through on his threat. At 9 inches the morning, a courier knocked on my door, handing me an official envelope from the Chicago Civil Court. Opening it, I found a 47-page lawsuit where Daniel claimed not only the $29 million, but also damages for malicious concealment of marital assets. His legal argument was twisted but seemingly well-structured. He alleged that during his marriage to Emily, between 2012 and 2014, they had established a business collaboration that was never formally dissolved. He also claimed that Emily had used business ideas and contacts he had provided during their relationship to build her business empire. The most outrageous part was the list of witnesses Daniel presented to support his version. Names I didn't recognize. People who could supposedly confirm his involvement in Emily's initial project. It was clear he had been preparing this sham for a long time. I immediately called Michael to schedule an emergency meeting. When I arrived at his office that afternoon, I found him meticulously reviewing every page of the lawsuit with a serious expression. David, I'm not going to lie to you. Daniel has hired Christopher Vaughn, one of the most aggressive inheritance lawyers in Chicago. He's known for winning complicated cases using legal technicalities and media pressure. What does that mean for us? I asked, feeling worry creep over me. It means they're going to play dirty. Vaughn has a reputation for leaking information to the press to create public pressure on his opponents. We'll probably see articles in the papers about the selfish father denying the successful entrepreneur's widower his inheritance. Michael was right. The next day, the tabloid paper The Chicago Chronicle published an article titled, "The $1 Million Battle for Emily Miller's Inheritance: Justice or Family Greed." The article, clearly biased in Daniel's favor, presented a completely distorted version of the facts. According to the publication, Daniel was a successful entrepreneur who had sacrificed his own career to support his wife's dreams, and was now being unfairly excluded from the fruits of their marital collaboration. The article included a photo of Daniel dressed in mourning at the funeral, with a caption that read, "The pain of a husband fighting for justice." That same week, while Michael prepared our legal response, I dedicated myself to finding more evidence of Daniel's true character. Patricia had mentioned that Emily kept all her personal documents in a safe in her private office, and that she had left me the combination in case of an emergency. When I opened the safe, I found a treasure trove of information. Emily had been meticulous in saving all correspondence related to her divorce, including emails Daniel had sent her in 2014 when he left the marriage. In an email dated February 15th, 2014, Daniel wrote, "Emily, I need you to understand that this isn't working. I'm not ready to be a father, and frankly, your obsession with opening a business seems like a childish fantasy. I've decided to move to New York to start over. Don't try to contact me." Another email from March 3rd, 2014 was even more revealing. "I've emptied the joint account because I need that money to get established. Consider it my compensation for the 2 years I wasted in this marriage. I hope you find a way to pay the apartment debts without involving me." But the most valuable document was a handwritten letter that Emily had drafted for her lawyer in August 2014 during the divorce proceedings. In it, she systematically detailed all of Daniel's manipulations and abandonment. "My husband, Daniel Peterson, abandoned me on January 28, 2014, upon learning of my pregnancy. In the following weeks, he emptied our joint bank account, taking $12,000, which were my personal savings. When I lost the baby in March due to stress, I tried to contact him to inform him, but he had blocked all means of communication. I formally request that the divorce decree states that Daniel waives any future rights to my assets or income." This letter was notarized and had full legal weight. It was the definitive proof that Daniel had voluntarily waived all rights to Emily's estate. Armed with this evidence, I returned to Michael's office with renewed confidence. When I showed him the documents, his expression changed completely. "David, this is pure gold," he said with a smile. "This notarized letter proves not only Daniel's voluntary abandonment, but also his explicit waiver of future rights. Any judge with half a brain will dismiss his lawsuit immediately. But Michael also warned me about the tactics we could expect. Vaughn will try to discredit these documents. He'll say Emily was emotionally distraught during the divorce, or that circumstances have changed. He'll also try to prove that Daniel contributed in some way to Emily's subsequent success. To strengthen our case, Michael suggested we find people who had known Daniel during his marriage to Emily to testify. We need witnesses who can confirm his abandonment and his lack of support for your daughter's business projects. I then remembered Helen Davis, Emily's best friend since college. Helen had been a direct witness to my daughter's suffering during the divorce, and knew the circumstances of Daniel's abandonment perfectly. When I contacted Helen, she immediately offered to testify in our favor. "Mr. Miller, I was with Emily the day Daniel left her. I'll never forget how she cried that night, telling me she felt betrayed not just as a wife, but as a person. That man is a coward, and he can't show up now claiming rights he voluntarily gave up." Helen also provided me with additional information about Daniel that I didn't know. During their marriage, Daniel never showed any interest in Emily's business plans. On the contrary, he always ridiculed them, telling her it was a waste of time. He even forbade her from using her personal savings for the business consulting she wanted to hire. With all these elements, Michael began drafting our response to the lawsuit. But before filing it, we decided to take a strategic step that would put Daniel in a very uncomfortable position. "David," Michael said, "we're going to ask the court to require Daniel to present documentary evidence of his supposed contribution to Emily's business success. If he really participated in creating her fortune, he must have contracts, invoices, investment records. We know he doesn't have them, but forcing him to try to produce them will reveal the fraudulent nature of his claim." That night, as I reviewed all the documents we had collected one more time, I felt a mix of sadness and determination. Emily had been an extraordinary woman who built her success despite betrayals and abandonment. My duty as a father was to protect her legacy from the clutches of those who only saw her death as an opportunity for easy enrichment. While Michael was preparing our legal response, Patricia contacted me with information that would completely change the course of our case. She asked me to meet her at her apartment on a Thursday night, assuring me she had something explosive to show me. When I arrived at her place in Lincoln Park, Patricia seemed nervous but determined. "Mr. Miller, after our last conversation, I remembered something important. Emily didn't just ask me to record Daniel's phone calls. She also installed a recording system in her personal office after his first in-person meeting with him. Patricia turned on her laptop and showed me a folder full of audio files. Emily was very cautious. When Daniel showed up in January asking about her finances, she suspected he would try something later. So, she decided to record any future meetings she might have with him. "Were there more meetings?" I asked, feeling like I was about to discover something crucial. "Yes, Mr. Miller. 2 meetings that Emily never told anyone about, not even you. Daniel visited her in her office on February 28th and again on March 14th, just a week before she passed away." Patricia played the first recording from February 28th. Hearing Emily's voice, weak but firm, a lump formed in my throat. It was obvious she was already very sick, but she maintained her dignity. "Daniel, what do you want after all these years?" I could hear Emily say. "Emily, I know you're sick, and I know you've been very successful financially. I think it's time we resolved our past issues," Daniel replied in a syrupy voice. "We don't have past issues, Daniel. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and I moved on with my life. Look, let's be practical. You've built an empire of nearly $30 million. I was your husband for 2 crucial years of your life. Legally, I could claim a part of that, but I'd rather reach a friendly agreement." Emily's response was powerful. "Daniel, you have no right to what I've built. You signed documents waiving any future claims when we divorced. Besides, everything I have, I built after you abandoned me." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, dear Emily. I've consulted with specialized lawyers, and it turns out some of those divorce documents have legal loopholes that could benefit me, especially if you die without a clear will that specifically excludes me." Those words sent a chill down my spine. Daniel wasn't just planning to claim the inheritance after Emily's death. He was threatening her directly, waiting for her to die. "Are you threatening me, Daniel?" Emily's voice asked with a tone of disbelief. "It's not a threat, it's a legal reality. But like I said, I'd rather resolve this civilly. If you give me, say, $5 million now, we can sign a document where I definitively waive any future claims. I will never give you a cent. And if you try anything legal, I assure you I will publicly reveal your true character and how you abandoned me when I was pregnant. Emily, I don't think you're in a position to threaten anyone. Your illness is serious, and according to my medical information, you have a few months left to live. Think about it. 5 million now, or legal trouble for your family after you're gone." The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming shut. Patricia explained that Emily had kicked Daniel out of her office, but he had returned 2 weeks later for an even more revealing conversation. The second recording, from March 14th, was even more incriminating. In it, Daniel showed his true nature without any pretense. "Emily, I've been thinking about our last conversation. I've done more research into your financial situation, and I think I've underestimated your assets. My contacts in the financial sector tell me you could have up to $35 million in properties, investments, and cash. Daniel, I don't know how you got that information, but it's completely inappropriate for you to be investigating my private finances. Look, let's be honest. You're going to die soon, and that money is going to go somewhere. Your father is an old man who doesn't need that much money. I'm 42 and have my whole life ahead of me. We could make an arrangement that benefits everyone." "An arrangement? Are you insane?" "Listen to me, Emily. I can create a lot of legal problems for your family after your death. I have lawyers who can prove our divorce wasn't processed correctly in certain technical aspects. We can drag out the legal proceedings for years, freezing all your assets and ruining your family's reputation. Daniel, you're despicable. I can't believe I was ever married to you. I'm a realist, Emily. But I'm going to make you one last generous offer. You give me $15 million now, and I guarantee your father will inherit the rest without any problems. If you refuse this proposal, I assure you I will fight for everything, and your family won't see a dollar of your fortune without going through years of legal battles." Emily's voice on the recording sounded tired but determined. "Daniel, you better hear me clearly. I will never give you anything. I have modified my will specifically to exclude you from any inheritance, and I have documented all your threats. If you try anything after my death, My family will have all the proof needed to show you're a shameless opportunist. We'll see, Emily. We'll see who has the last word in this matter." Patricia stopped the recording and looked at me with a grave expression. "Mr. Miller, after this second visit, Emily asked me to immediately contact her lawyer, Michael, to modify the will. She also instructed me to keep these recordings in a safe place and give them to you if Daniel tried any legal action after her death. It was incredible. Emily, even in her final days, had been protecting my future and her own from the clutches of this manipulator. The recordings not only prove Daniel's opportunistic intentions, but also his direct threats and his illegal knowledge of confidential financial information." "Patricia, how is Daniel getting information about Emily's finances?" "That's something else I found out, Mr. Miller. Last Tuesday, a bank employee contacted me discreetly. Apparently, Daniel had tried to bribe one of the tellers to get information about Emily's accounts. The employee refused the bribe, but Daniel insisted several times during February and March. This added another crime to Daniel's record: attempted bribery and illegal access to banking information. With this new evidence, our case was not only solid for defending the inheritance, but we could also press criminal charges against Daniel. That night, I called Michael to tell him about the recordings. His reaction was one of total astonishment. "David, with this evidence, not only are we going to win the case, but Daniel could face criminal charges for threats, attempted extortion, and illegal access to financial information. This completely changes our strategy. We're no longer playing defense. We're going on the attack. For the first time since Emily's death, I felt that justice was on our side. My daughter, even from the grave, had managed to protect her legacy and give me the weapons necessary to confront this opportunist who thought he could take advantage of our pain." On May 15th, 2024, the day of the first hearing at the Chicago Civil Court arrived. Michael and I arrived early, loaded with boxes full of documents, recordings, and testimonies. I wore my best black suit, the same one I had worn to Emily's funeral, feeling that somehow she would be present in that room, supporting me. At 9:30 a.m., Daniel entered the courtroom accompanied by his lawyer, Christopher Vaughn, and 3 people I didn't recognize. Daniel wore an impeccable gray suit and a look of false solemnity, as if he were the victim in this whole affair. Judge Maria Delgado, a woman in her 52nds with a reputation for being strict but fair, opened the session by explaining the procedure. Daniel, as the plaintiff, would have the first opportunity to present his case. Christopher Vaughn stood up arrogantly and began his argument. "Your Honor, my client, Daniel Peterson, was the devoted husband of Emily Miller during the most formative years of her business career. During their marriage between 2012 and 2014, Daniel provided the emotional, intellectual, and logistical support that allowed Emily to develop the ideas that would later lead to her millionaire success." Vaughn continued with a completely distorted version of the facts. "My client sacrificed his own professional opportunities to support his wife's business dreams. It was he who suggested the concept of fashion stores that combined American elegance with affordability. It was also Daniel who introduced her to key contacts in the retail sector, who later became Emily's business partners. Hearing those blatant lies made my blood boil, but Michael had advised me to maintain my composure during the opposing party's presentation. Vaughn then presented his 3 witnesses. The first was Raymond Simmons, who identified himself as a business consultant and claimed to have known Daniel and Emily during their marriage. "I worked with Daniel in 2013 developing the business plan for Emily's fashion stores," Simmons declared under oath. "Daniel was the brain behind the business strategy. Emily had the initial capital, but it was Daniel who designed the entire operational model." The second witness was Sarah Jones, who presented herself as a former business partner and supported the version that Daniel had been fundamental in Emily's early business steps. The third witness, Albert Reed, claimed to be an investor who had met Emily through Daniel and had participated in the first rounds of financing for her stores. When these supposed witnesses finished their statements, Michael leaned into my ear. "David, these people are clearly lying. Their testimonies are too coordinated and specific. We're going to unmask them during cross-examination." It was Michael's turn to present our case, and his strategy was brilliant. Instead of starting with legal arguments, He decided to play the recordings Patricia had saved directly. Your Honor, before we present our arguments, we want the court to hear the plaintiff's own words, recorded during his meetings with the late Emily Miller during the final months of her life. When the first recording from February 28th began to play, I saw Daniel's expression change completely. His face turned pale, and he began to whisper furiously in his lawyer's ear. Emily's voice filled the room. Daniel, you have no right to what I've built. You signed documents waiving any future claims when we divorced. And then Daniel's revealing response. I've consulted with specialized lawyers, and it turns out some of those divorce documents have legal loopholes that could benefit me, especially if you die without a clear will that specifically excludes me. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Judge Delgado took notes intently as she listened to Daniel's explicit threats toward Emily. When the part came where Daniel said, "Your illness is serious, and according to my medical information, you have a few months left to live. Think about it. $5 million now, or legal trouble for your family after you're gone." I saw several attendees in the room exchange looks of disgust. Michael stopped the recording and addressed the judge. Your Honor, as you can see, the plaintiff not only admits he has no legal rights to the inheritance, but also acknowledges that he is taking advantage of the deceased's terminal illness to try to extort her. Christopher Vaughn immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Those recordings were made without my client's consent and violate his right to privacy. Judge Delgado responded firmly. Overruled. The recordings were made on the deceased's private property, and the plaintiff was informed that the conversation was being recorded. Continue, Mr. Clark. Michael then played the second recording, from March 14th, where Daniel was even more explicit about his intentions. I can create a lot of legal problems for your family after your death. I have lawyers who can prove our divorce wasn't processed correctly in certain technical aspects. When the recording finished, Michael presented the notarized letter Emily had written during her divorce, where she expressly excluded Daniel from any future claims on her assets. Your Honor, this document, signed before a notary in August 2014, proves that the deceased was absolutely clear in her intention to exclude the plaintiff from any financial benefit. Furthermore, we have Emily Miller's will, drafted in January 2024, where she specifically names her father, David Miller, as the sole universal heir. But the most devastating blow came when Michael called Patricia Johnson as a witness. Patricia, in a clear and firm voice, testified about Daniel's attempts to obtain financial and legal information about Emily. The plaintiff tried to bribe me on multiple occasions to obtain confidential information about Emily Miller's finances. He also attempted to bribe bank employees to illegally access the deceased's accounts, all while she was battling cancer. During the cross-examination of Daniel's witnesses, Michael masterfully proved that their statements were fabricated. When he questioned Raymond Simmons about supposed business meetings in 2013, Simmons couldn't provide specific addresses, exact dates, or documents to back up his claims. Can you show the court any invoice, contract, or document that proves your alleged collaboration with Mr. Peterson in 2013? Michael asked. Well, those documents were lost during a move, Simmons replied nervously. How convenient, Michael retorted with irony. When he questioned Sarah Jones about her supposed business partnership with Emily, the woman also couldn't produce any documentary evidence. Worse, when Michael asked her about specific details of the fashion business, it became clear she knew nothing about the retail sector. At the end of the hearing, which lasted more than 4 hours, Judge Delgado announced that she would study all the evidence presented and issue her decision within 15 days. When we left the courthouse, Daniel approached me with a furious expression. This isn't over, David. I have the resources to appeal any adverse decision. I can keep this fight going for years. Daniel, I replied calmly, I think after what was heard in that room today, you should be more worried about criminal charges than the inheritance. His expression of fury turned to one of concern. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Daniel Peterson seemed to have understood that he had gravely underestimated the situation. The 15 days of waiting after the hearing were the longest of my life. Michael had warned me that, although we had a solid case, the courts can sometimes be unpredictable, especially when so much money is involved. During that time, I decided to dig even deeper into the investigation of Daniel and his supposed witnesses. My first discovery came through my nephew, Charles, who works in the IT department of a private investigation firm. I asked him to discreetly check the backgrounds of the 3 witnesses Daniel had presented. "Uncle David, I've found some very interesting things about these individuals," Charles told me during a family dinner. "Raymond Simmons has a history of false statements in other trials. In 2019, he was fined for perjury in a real estate fraud case in New York. The information about Sarah Jones was even more revealing. This woman is an amateur theater actress and has occasionally worked making false testimonies for money. There are records of her being paid $3,000 to testify in a divorce case last year. As for Albert Reed, Charles discovered he didn't even have a license as a financial investor. He's a used car salesman who was fired from his last job for fraud. It seems Daniel specifically recruited people with questionable backgrounds to lie under oath. Armed with this information, I immediately contacted Michael. "We need to present this evidence to the court before they issue the verdict," I said. "David, this is perfect. We're going to request a supplementary hearing to present evidence of perjury. If we can prove that Daniel organized a scheme of false testimonies, he will not only lose the case, but he'll face additional criminal charges." On May 28th, 2 days before the scheduled date for the verdict, Judge Delgado agreed to hear our new evidence. This time the courtroom was even more tense. Daniel and Vaughn arrived visibly nervous, especially after Michael had notified them about the nature of the evidence we were going to present. Michael began his presentation by showing Simmons's criminal record. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's first witness has a documented history of perjury. In 2019, a New York court ordered him to pay a $5,000 fine for false statements in a real estate fraud case. When he presented the evidence about Sarah Jones, Judge Delgado frowned with clear disgust. This person has taken money to make false statements in multiple court cases. We have invoices where she appears as a testimonial actress for amounts ranging from $2,000 to $4,000 per case. The most devastating information came when Michael proved that Albert Reed had never been licensed as an investor. Your Honor, not only is this man not an investor, but he was fired from his job as a car salesman for trying to scam customers with falsified documents. But the final blow came when Michael presented bank records showing transfers from Daniel to the 3 witnesses in the weeks leading up to the hearing. Your Honor, we have evidence that the plaintiff paid $8,000 to Simmons, $6,000 to Jones, and $5,000 to Reed, exactly 10 days before their testimony in this court. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Delgado looked at Daniel with an expression of outrage I had never seen in a courtroom. "Mr. Peterson," the judge said, addressing Daniel directly, "can you explain these bank transfers to people who later testified under oath in your favor?" Daniel stood up, trembling, clearly unprepared to answer this evidence. "Your Honor, those transfers were personal loans that have no relation to this case. Personal loans of exact amounts to 3 different people who just happened to testify in your favor?" the judge replied sarcastically. Vaughn tried to intervene. "Your Honor, my client has the right to the presumption of innocence." "Silence!" Judge Delgado interrupted. "This court will not tolerate attempts to manipulate justice through purchased testimony. Mr. Peterson has not only presented false witnesses, but has organized a deliberate scheme of perjury." The judge then did something that completely surprised me. She ordered the immediate arrest of the 3 false witnesses and summoned Daniel for a separate criminal hearing on charges of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. As for the main case, the judge continued, "Based on the evidence presented by the defendant, David Miller, this court finds that Mr. Daniel Peterson's claim is completely baseless and fraudulent." The judge proceeded to read her decision. First, the presented recordings unequivocally demonstrate that the plaintiff admitted to having no legal rights to the inheritance of Emily Miller. Second, the deceased's will is absolutely valid and expressly excludes the plaintiff from any benefit. Third, the notarized letter from 2014 clearly establishes the plaintiff's voluntary waiver of future financial claims. Furthermore, the judge continued, This court finds that the plaintiff attempted to extort the deceased during her terminal illness, taking advantage of her vulnerability to obtain illicit financial benefits. The verdict was damning. The claim of Mr. Daniel Peterson is completely denied. It is confirmed that David Miller is the sole and legitimate universal heir of Emily Miller. Furthermore, the plaintiff is ordered to pay all court costs and is fined $50,000 for presenting false testimony. But the judge wasn't finished. Finally, this court orders a criminal investigation to be opened against Daniel Peterson for the crimes of threats, attempted extortion, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. The plaintiff is forbidden from leaving the country until the criminal investigation is concluded. When the judge finished reading the verdict, Daniel was completely slumped in his chair. His face had lost all color, and Vaughn looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. As we left the courthouse, several journalists who had been following the case were waiting for us. Michael had prepared a brief statement. Justice has prevailed. Mr. David Miller has successfully defended his daughter's legacy against fraudulent attempts of appropriation. The memory of Emily Miller remains intact, and her final will has been fully respected. That afternoon, in the quiet of my home, I reread Emily's will for the 100th time. In one of its final clauses, she had written, "Dad, I hope you never have to use this document to defend yourself from unscrupulous people. But if that moment comes, remember that I built all of this thinking of your future and in honoring Mom's memory. Don't let anyone tarnish our family legacy." For the first time since her death, I felt that Emily could rest in peace. Her final battle had been won, and her legacy was protected forever from the clutches of those who only saw money where they should have seen love, sacrifice, and honest work. The days following the verdict brought a flood of revelations that neither Michael nor I could have anticipated. The legal victory had opened the floodgates, and people who were previously afraid to speak out began contacting me with additional information about Daniel's true activities. The first to come forward was Rose Fernandez, a 45-year-old woman who identified herself as Daniel's ex-girlfriend between 2018 and 2020. Rose called me on June 2nd, 3 days after the newspapers published the news of the verdict. "Mr. Miller, I've been following the case in the news, and I think you need to know more about Daniel Peterson," she said with a trembling voice during our phone conversation. "That man put me through a hell similar to what he did to your daughter." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, where Rose told me a story that chilled me to the bone. Daniel seduced me in 2018, when I had just inherited a property from my father. At first, he seemed like the perfect man, attentive, caring, interested in my well-being. But later I discovered that he had been investigating my financial situation before he even approached me. Rose continued to recount how Daniel had used the same manipulative tactics he tried with Emily. During the 2 years we were together, he constantly pressured me to lend him money for his supposed investment projects. When we broke up in 2020, I discovered he had stolen $35,000 from my bank account, using information he had gotten from me during our relationship. "Did you file a police report?" I asked. I tried to, but Daniel threatened to ruin my professional reputation if I took him to court. I work as a marketing director at a major company, and he knew people who could have caused me problems at work. In the end, I decided to consider that money the price of getting rid of him. But Rose wasn't Daniel's only victim. That same week, I was visited by Anthony Serrano, a 58-year-old retired businessman who had met Daniel at a poker club in 2021. "Mr. Miller, that man is a financial predator," Anthony told me during our meeting. "He approached me at the casino, posing as a successful investment consultant. He convinced me to invest $80,000 in a supposed investment fund that he managed. Anthony showed me documents that proved how Daniel had created a shell company called Peterson Investments and Associates to scam older people with considerable savings. When I tried to withdraw my investment 6 months later, I discovered the company didn't really exist, and that Daniel had used my money to cover his gambling debts." "Did he also threaten you so you wouldn't file a report?" I asked, suspecting the pattern. "Exactly. He said he had contacts in the police force who could make my life difficult. He also blackmailed me with compromising photos he had secretly taken during a business meeting where I had had too much to drink. These revelations motivated me to look for more of Daniel's victims. I contacted a private investigator recommended by Michael Luis Martinez, who specialized in financial fraud cases. Luis discovered that Daniel had been running a systematic scam operation for the past 10 years. Mr. Miller, this man has a very specific method. He researches vulnerable people or those in life transitions. Recent divorcees, widows with inheritances, struggling entrepreneurs, seniors with savings. Then he approaches them, feigning romantic or professional interest to gain their trust and access their financial resources. Luis's report revealed at least 12 documented victims between 2014 and 2024, with total losses exceeding $400,000. Each case followed the same pattern: seduction, manipulation, extraction of money, and then threats to prevent reporting. The most disturbing part, Luis continued, is that Daniel keeps detailed files on his victims, compromising photographs, secret recordings, personal information that he uses to blackmail them if they try to get their money back. With all this information, Michael and I decided to contact the District Attorney's Economic Crimes Division to present a broader case against Daniel. The assigned prosecutor, Robert Navarro, was extremely interested in the evidence we had collected. Gentlemen, what you're presenting to me is not just a case of fraudulent inheritance, but a systematic criminal operation that has been running for a decade, Prosecutor Navarro told us. With the testimonies and evidence you have, we can prosecute Daniel Peterson for continuous fraud, threats, blackmail, and racketeering. But the most shocking revelation came when Patricia contacted me again with information she had discovered while reviewing Emily's files. Mr. Miller, I've found something disturbing in Emily's call logs from last year. During November and December of 2023, Daniel was not only calling her directly but had also been contacting several of the store's clients and suppliers, asking about the financial health of the business. Patricia showed me a list of more than 20 business contacts that Daniel had tried to question about Emily's finances. Some of these suppliers called me at the time to ask if they should give him information, because Daniel was presenting himself as a family consultant hired by Emily to evaluate the business. Did Emily know about these contacts? Yes, Mr. Miller. That's why she tightened security measures at the company and installed the recording systems. Emily suspected Daniel was planning something big, but we never imagined it would be so systematic and cruel. That additional information proved that Daniel had been planning his strategy to take the inheritance for at least 6 months before Emily's death. He wasn't an impromptu opportunist, but a calculated predator who had been waiting for my daughter's moment of greatest vulnerability to execute his plan. On June 10th, Prosecutor Navarro informed me that Daniel had been formally charged with 10 different criminal counts. Mr. Miller, thanks to your perseverance and the evidence you provided, we are going to prosecute this individual for all his crimes. The other victims you located have also decided to testify, so Daniel will face decades in prison if convicted. That night, as I organized all the case documents, I reflected on the true extent of Daniel's evil. He hadn't just been an opportunistic ex-husband trying to grab an inheritance, but a professional criminal who had turned the suffering of others into his way of life. Emily, without knowing it, had become the victim who finally exposed Daniel's entire criminal network. Her courage to document his threats and her foresight to protect the evidence had not only saved our family inheritance, but had put an end to a decade of crimes against innocent people. On June 18, 2024, when it seemed the case was resolved and Daniel would finally face the consequences of his actions, I received a call that changed my perspective on everything I had experienced over these months. It was from Hope Miller, a woman who identified herself as Emily's second cousin and who lived in Philadelphia. David, I've been following Daniel's case in the news, and I think there's something else you need to know about Emily's death, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Her words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean something else? I'd rather tell you in person. Could you come to Philadelphia this weekend? It's about Emily's last days in the hospital. The trip to Philadelphia was one of the most agonizing of my life. During the drive, my mind created increasingly terrible scenarios about what Hope might reveal to me. She worked as a nurse at Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia, and although she hadn't directly cared for Emily, she had contacts in the Chicago hospital system. We met at her apartment on Saturday morning. Hope, a 52-year-old woman with 20 years of experience in oncology, greeted me with a grave expression and medical documents in her hands. David, a colleague of mine from Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, contacted me after seeing the news about Daniel. She told me something that had been bothering her since Emily's death, but she hadn't dared to report it until now. Hope showed me hospital visitor logs that her colleague had discreetly copied. According to these documents, Daniel visited Emily in the hospital on 3 occasions during March, always when you were not present. The visits were on March 5th, 12th, and 19th. That's impossible, I replied immediately. Emily had expressly forbidden me from allowing any visits from Daniel. Besides, I was practically living at the hospital during her last days. Exactly. That's why these visits are so strange. According to the records, Daniel presented himself as Emily's legal husband and had forged documents that supposedly gave him authorization to visit her during the night shifts. Hope continued to explain what her colleague had observed. During the visit on March 19th, just 3 days before Emily's death, Daniel was in the room for over 2 hours. The nurse on duty found it strange that Emily was very agitated after that visit, and that her vital signs had worsened significantly. Are you suggesting that Daniel might have... I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm not suggesting anything specific, David, but my colleague told me that Emily asked her that night not to allow any more visits from Daniel and that she was very scared. She also mentioned something about not letting him force me to sign anything. Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. Had Daniel tried to force Emily to change her will during her last days? Had he used her vulnerable state to pressure her while I wasn't there? Hope handed me a copy of the nursing notes from that night. They read, "Patient very agitated after family visit. Requests no more visits from husband. Mentions concern over legal documents. Mild sedative administered to calm anxiety." David, there's something else. My colleague checked the hospital's security cameras from that night. Daniel left the room carrying a folder he didn't have when he went in. I immediately called Michael from Philadelphia to inform him of these revelations. His reaction was one of total alarm. "David, we need to investigate this immediately." If Daniel tried to coerce Emily during her terminal illness to modify legal documents, we'd be talking about a much more serious crime. Get back to Chicago immediately. On Monday morning, Michael and I met with Prosecutor Navarro to present this new evidence. The prosecutor immediately ordered all hospital security cameras to be reviewed and all staff who were on duty during Daniel's visits to be questioned. 3 days later, the prosecutor summoned us with information that surpassed our worst suspicions. "Gentlemen, we have reviewed the security footage and confirmed that Daniel Peterson illegally visited Emily Miller on multiple occasions using falsified documentation," the prosecutor continued. "More seriously, we have found in Daniel's possession a copy of Emily's original will with handwritten modifications that intended to include him as a beneficiary of 40% of the inheritance. These modifications are dated March 19th, the same day as his last visit to the hospital." "Are you saying Daniel tried to forge Emily's will?" I asked, feeling outrage consume me. "Exactly. We have evidence that Daniel brought forged documents to Emily's room and tried to force her to sign modifications to the will. According to the nurse's testimony, Emily flatly refused and threatened to report him, which would explain her agitated state that night." Michael intervened. "Prosecutor Navarro, this constitutes coercion of a sick person, forgery of documents, and possibly attempted murder if the stress caused contributed to Emily's deterioration." "Correct, Mr. Clark. We have added these charges to the indictment against Daniel Peterson. He now faces the possibility of 25 years in prison." But the most shocking revelation came when the prosecutor showed us the full contents of the folder Daniel had taken from the hospital. In addition to the forged will, Daniel had prepared power of attorney documents that would have given him total control over Emily's assets if she had survived in a vegetative state. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Daniel had a backup plan. If Emily didn't die immediately, he would have tried to declare her mentally incapacitated and assume control of her entire fortune as her caregiver husband. It was a Machiavellian plan designed to seize the $29 million, regardless of whether Emily lived or died." That revelation affected me deeply. For all these months, I had thought Daniel was simply an opportunist who had shown up after Emily's death to claim money. Now I discovered he had been much worse, a predator who had been stalking my daughter during her final days, trying to take advantage of her extreme vulnerability to steal everything she had built. "There's one more thing, Mr. Miller," the prosecutor continued. "We've found evidence that Daniel had been monitoring Emily's health status through illegal contacts in the hospital system. He knew exactly when she would be most vulnerable and planned his visits accordingly." When we left the prosecutor's office that afternoon, Michael put a hand on my shoulder. "David, I know these revelations are painful, but they also prove something very important. Emily fought until the very end to protect her legacy and yours. Even in her final days, she stood up to Daniel and refused to give in to his pressure." That night, in the solitude of my home, I reread the letters Emily had written to me during her illness one last time. In one of them, dated March 20th, just 2 days before her death, there was a line that now took on new meaning. "Dad, if anything happens to me, make sure my will is respected. Don't let anyone manipulate what we've built together." Emily had known exactly what Daniel was trying to do, and she had fought with her last breath to protect our future. Her courage and determination had not only preserved the family inheritance, but had exposed the true criminal nature of a man who had made the suffering of others his way of life. On July 15th, 2024, almost 4 months after Emily's funeral, the day of the criminal trial against Daniel Peterson arrived. The Chicago Criminal Courthouse was packed with journalists, Daniel's victims, and curious onlookers who had followed the case through the media. Daniel arrived at the courthouse in handcuffs, escorted by 2 sheriff's deputies. His appearance had changed dramatically during the months he had spent in pretrial detention. The arrogant, well-dressed man who had appeared at Emily's funeral now looked haggard, with unkempt hair and an expression of total defeat. The presiding judge, a magistrate with over 15 years of experience in organized crime cases, opened the session by reading the 14 criminal charges against Daniel. Continuous fraud, forgery of documents, threats, coercion, blackmail, witness tampering, professional misconduct, and violation of court orders. Prosecutor Robert Navarro began his presentation with a detailed chronology of Daniel's crimes over the last decade. "Your Honor, the defendant, Daniel Peterson, is not an occasional criminal but a systematic predator who has built his entire adult life by preying on vulnerable people." For the next 3 hours, the prosecutor presented testimonies from the 12 identified victims of Daniel. Each story followed the same gruesome pattern: seduction, manipulation, extraction of resources, and threats to prevent reporting. Rose Fernandez testified in a firm voice. "Daniel stole $350 from me using information he obtained during our intimate relationship. When I tried to get my money back, he threatened to destroy my professional career and leak private photographs he had taken without my consent." Anthony Serrano recounted how Daniel had created the shell company Peterson Investments and Associates to scam him. "That man stole my life savings, $80,000 I had saved for my retirement. When I discovered the fraud, he blackmailed me with compromising photographs to prevent me from filing a report." But the most impactful testimony came from the nurse, Mercedes Lopez, who had cared for Emily during her final days. Mercedes testified about Daniel's illegal visits to the hospital and his attempt to coerce Emily into changing her will. The defendant showed up multiple times using falsified documentation, identifying himself as the patient's legal husband. During his last visit on March 19th, Miss Emily became extremely agitated. She specifically asked me not to allow any more visits from this man, saying, and I quote, "Don't let him try to make me sign anything again." The most devastating evidence came when the prosecutor presented the hospital's security footage, showing Daniel leaving Emily's room with documents he didn't have when he entered. The forged documents Daniel had prepared were also presented, including the modified will and the fraudulent power of attorney papers. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, the defendant not only tried to appropriate an inheritance that did not belong to him, but he harassed a dying woman during her final days, taking advantage of her state of extreme vulnerability to try to steal $29 million. When it was the defense's turn, Daniel's lawyer, who had replaced Christopher Vaughn after he withdrew from the case, tried to present a defense based on temporary mental disorder and gambling addiction. Your Honor, my client has been battling a severe gambling addiction that led him to make desperate decisions. He is not a professional criminal, but a sick man who needs treatment, not prison. But this strategy fell apart when the prosecutor presented evidence of Daniel's meticulous planning. Investigators had found a complete file in his apartment with detailed information on all his victims, including photographs, financial records, and specific strategies to manipulate each one. Your Honor, Daniel did not keep organized files on his victims for 10 years. A gambling addict does not forge professional documents or create shell companies. What we have here is a professional criminal who has perfected his method over a decade. The most emotional moment of the trial came when I was allowed to read an impact statement as Emily's father. With a trembling but firm voice, I addressed the court. Your Honor, Daniel Peterson not only tried to steal the money my daughter built with so much effort, he desecrated her memory, tortured her final days, and turned our family's grief into a legal nightmare. Emily died thinking this man could destroy everything she had worked to protect. My daughter fought cancer for 4 months with extraordinary courage, but she also had to fight against the threats and blackmail of this predator during her most vulnerable moments. Daniel is not just a thief. He is someone who feeds on the suffering of others. After 2 days of testimonies and evidence presentation, the judge announced a 2-hour recess to deliberate. During that wait, Michael and I sat on the benches in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by the other victims of Daniel who had come to witness the verdict. David, Michael said to me, regardless of what the judge decides, we've already won the most important battle. Daniel will never be able to touch Emily's inheritance, and his criminal network has been completely dismantled. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge began to read her verdict in a clear and firm voice. After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court finds the defendant, Daniel Peterson, guilty of all charges brought against him. The verdict was damning. The defendant is sentenced to 18 years in prison for continuous fraud, 3 additional years for forgery of documents, 2 years for threats and coercion, and 2 years for witness tampering, for a total of 25 years of effective prison time. Furthermore, the judge continued, the defendant is ordered to pay a total restitution of $847,000 to his victims, plus court costs. The defendant is permanently barred from engaging in any activity related to financial consulting or wealth management. When the judge finished reading the sentence, Daniel collapsed completely in his chair. His lawyer tried to comfort him, but it was clear that the weight of his crimes had finally fallen upon him. As I left the courthouse, I was surrounded by Daniel's other victims, all expressing their gratitude for my courage in confronting him. Mr. Miller, Rose told me, if you hadn't fought so hard for your daughter's memory, Daniel would still be free, stealing from and threatening more innocent people. That night, as I had dinner alone at my house, I reflected on the 4 months that had passed since Emily's death. The legal battle was over. Daniel would face decades in prison, and my daughter's inheritance was completely protected. But more importantly, Emily's memory had been vindicated, and her legacy would remain intact forever. 6 months after the trial against Daniel, on January 15, 2025, I was sitting in the office that had belonged to Emily, surrounded by architects, lawyers, and representatives of charitable organizations. That day would mark the beginning of a new chapter in my daughter's legacy, one she had dreamed of but that circumstances had not allowed her to see realized. During the months following Daniel's conviction, I had had time to reflect deeply on what to do with the $29 million inheritance Emily had left me. At 68 years old, I didn't need that much money to live comfortably for the rest of my days. I knew that Emily would have wanted her fortune to serve a purpose greater than my personal well-being. In her personal letters, which I had read countless times, Emily had repeatedly mentioned her dream of helping women entrepreneurs who faced difficulties similar to those she had experienced during her divorce. "Dad," she had written in one of her last letters, "if anything happens to me, I would like part of what I've built to help other women who are struggling to get ahead after being abandoned." With that inspiration, I had decided to create the Emily Miller Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs. The foundation would be dedicated to providing interest-free loans, free legal advice, and emotional support to women who had been victims of spousal abandonment and wanted to start their own businesses. Patricia Johnson, who had been Emily's right-hand woman for years, had agreed to direct the foundation. "Mr. Miller," she had said when I offered her the position, "it would be an honor to continue Emily's work in this way." She always said she wanted to use her success to help other women find their economic independence. The foundation's headquarters would be in the same building where Emily had had her main offices. We had allocated $15 million as an initial endowment, which would guarantee the foundation's operation for decades. I would keep the other $14 million as a family reserve and for my own living expenses. During the inauguration ceremony, which took place exactly 1 year after Emily's death, many of the people who had been important in her life were present. Helen Davis, her best friend since college, gave an emotional speech. Emily was a woman who transformed pain into strength, adversity into opportunity. When Daniel abandoned her pregnant and without resources, she didn't just lament her situation. She channeled that experience into the determination to never again depend on anyone for her economic well-being. This foundation represents exactly what Emily would have wanted, to turn her personal story into hope for other women. Michael Clark, who had been crucial throughout the legal battle, also spoke at the ceremony. "I have seen many cases of disputed inheritances throughout my career, but I had never witnessed a fight as noble as the one David Miller fought to protect his daughter's memory. Emily can rest in peace knowing that her legacy was not only preserved but has become a source of hope for future generations." But the most significant moment of the ceremony came when Rose Fernandez, one of Daniel's victims who now worked as a volunteer counselor at the foundation, read the first request for help we had received. Maria Carmen Ruiz, 34 years old, mother of 2, abandoned by her husband after 12 years of marriage, requests a loan of $25,000 to open a bakery and be able to support her children independently. It was exactly the type of case for which Emily would have fought tooth and nail. In the following months, the foundation began to operate at full capacity. We received between 50 and 100 applications monthly from women all over the country seeking support to start their businesses. Our team of counselors, which included several of Daniel's victims who had decided to transform their experience into help for others, evaluated each case with the same care Emily would have put into her own businesses. In March 2025, I received a letter that moved me deeply. It was from Maria Carmen Ruiz, the foundation's first beneficiary, informing me that her bakery had been a resounding success and that she had already been able to hire 3 additional employees. "Mr. Miller," Maria Carmen wrote, "you not only helped me financially, but you gave me the confidence to believe in myself again. When my husband left me, I thought my life was over. Now I know it was actually just beginning. Every loaf of bread I bake carries a piece of the hope that Emily passed on to me through her foundation." In April, I received more news that filled me with satisfaction. Daniel had appealed his sentence, but the Illinois Supreme Court had upheld the 25-year prison sentence. Furthermore, he had begun to pay restitution to his victims from prison, working in the prison's carpentry workshop. "David," Michael informed me during one of our monthly meetings, "Daniel has lost all his appeals. He will spend the next 25 years in prison, and when he gets out, he will be a 6-7-year-old man without resources or a reputation. Justice, finally, has completely prevailed." But beyond the satisfaction of seeing Daniel pay for his crimes, what truly filled me with peace was seeing how Emily's legacy continued to grow. By the end of 2025, The foundation had helped more than 200 women start their own businesses, creating more than 800 indirect jobs throughout the country. Patricia regularly informed me about the progress of our beneficiaries. Mr. Miller, we have an 87% success rate in the businesses we've funded. This means that Emily not only built her own fortune, but has helped create hundreds of small family fortunes across the country. In December 2025, 2 years after Emily's death, I organized a Christmas dinner for all the people who had been important during this extraordinary journey. Michael, Patricia, Helen, Rose, Anthony, and many of the Foundation's beneficiaries gathered at my house to celebrate not just Christmas, but the triumph of justice and solidarity over greed and evil. During the dinner, I read aloud a paragraph from the last letter Emily had written to me. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. But I want you to know that everything I built was with our family's future in mind and the possibility of helping others who go through the difficulties I experienced. Don't let sadness paralyze you. Use what I've left you to create something beautiful that honors Mom's memory and mine." That night, as my guests shared stories of success and hope, I looked at the photograph of Emily that hung in the dining room and knew that she would be proud of what we had achieved together. Her death had been the end of her personal story, but it had marked the beginning of hundreds of stories of hope and overcoming adversity. Daniel Peterson had believed he could take Emily's legacy through lies and manipulation, but what he hadn't understood was that my daughter's true legacy was not in the $29 million she had accumulated, but in her indomitable spirit, her generosity, and her ability to transform suffering into strength to help others. Emily had won the final battle not only by protecting her inheritance from the clutches of an opportunist, but by turning that inheritance into a seed of hope for hundreds of women who, like her, had refused to surrender to adversity. If you liked this story, hit the like button, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thanks for watching.